Welcome back to Temple Emanu in Orange Village, Ohio. We are approaching the end of January 2017 and getting through the winter months, hopefully safely and comfortably. We have reached the portion of Vaera, the portion that is the second Torah portion in the book of Exodus. And it starts out with a curious little statement where God is saying, Vaera, I, God, appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai. But then he reveals himself to Moses, as he had done at the burning bush, as the God who is expressed in Yud-He, Vav-He, the tetragrammaton, which we do not know how to pronounce. But he says El Shaddai. Shaddai is one of the many names for God. It's a name of God that we most often associate with God's protective power. That's why the back of a mezuzah scroll has Shaddai written on it, and there is a custom that a mezuzah case has a shin on it. It's not required, but there's a custom to reflect that name of El Shaddai, and also a shin appears on tefillin. And so we look at that as God's protective power. The Torah portion goes on to the beginning of Moses and Aaron's series of appearances before Pharaoh, where they first ask Pharaoh to allow the Hebrews to go out and worship. And as each demand is refused, the stakes, of course, get higher and higher. And the first couple of plagues take place in this week's Torah portion. So not only are we here introduced to the idea of El Shaddai, God who is the protector, but we also get introduced in this Torah portion to the concept of Kaved Lev, the concept that refers to Pharaoh, who is of heavy heart. Kaved means heavy, and Lev, or Leb, means heart. What we need to understand, however, is that in biblical parlance, the Lev, the heart, is where our biblical ancestors believed you think. They didn't quite understand the brain. And so Kaved Lev, a heavy heart, or a sluggish heart, or a stupid heart, is what we're talking about with Pharaoh. And we understand what that means from the rest of the Exodus story. As the historian, the late Barbara Tuchman, pointed out, every time Pharaoh has an opportunity to change the course of his actions, he persists with this inability to understand or perceive or even to listen to his own advisors. And he persists in this course of action, which leads to destruction in Egypt, the death of the firstborn, and ultimately the exodus of the Hebrew slaves. At every point in this story, Pharaoh could have opened his mind and his ears, and perhaps even his heart, and understood that his persistence was bringing destruction upon Egypt. At one point, his advisors, in fact, say to him, "Don't you know that Egypt is already lost?" This is an important message for our time. We are living in a moment, not just in American history, but really in world history, where people have stopped listening to each other, where our intellects have become kaved, have become heavy and sluggish, where people react to what they think is the news and refuse to consider their positions from someone else's perspective. We certainly see that in American politics. We see it in world affairs. We see it in the kind of interning and nationalistic fever that is going through Europe. This is the moment when we need our Jewish tradition. In fact, all people need their religious traditions more than ever, as a way of reminding us that we should not become pharaohs, either nationally or even individually. Our minds and our hearts need to remain open to considering other possibilities, open to thinking that there may in fact be some other way to get the business of our society done, rather than just listening to people with whom we already agree. We saw what destruction that brought to Egypt. Exodus, the story of Exodus, means many, many things. But this week, as we are a couple of days into a new presidential administration, it's probably a good idea to remind ourselves that along with all those other meanings and all those other layers, the story of Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron appearing in front of the Pharaoh is above all a cautionary tale of what destruction can come if we become kaved lev, if we become unable to think and unable to open our hearts and minds. Shabbat Shalom.